All right. Welcome, councillors, to our council meeting for the. We just have the economic morning, don't we?
Yeah, it's me. Sorry.
Welcome, councillors, to our council meeting for the 30th of March, 2023. We'll start with a karakia. Neville, can I ask you to take us through that?
So we may tēnā koe kia mana koutou ko ngā kaikaini hero o reo Waikato tēnā koutou katoa no reira ki i ngoi tātou. Whakatahau ki tōru, whakatahau ki tonga, kia mā kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tā. I he ake ana tāta kura, e tio, e runga, e hauhu, i he mau mai oka. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you for that, Neville. All right, we'll move to apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Graff. Just want to extend this council's condolences at the recent loss of his father. And so our thoughts are with Councillor Graff at this time. We also have apologies for lateness from Councillor Mahuta. Any other apologies to note? No? All right, can I have a mover for that? Councillor Nicol, seconder Councillor Cookson, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. Confirmation of the agenda. While the agenda was very thick, there was quite a few pages. I think we'll make a pretty good time through it. Do I have a mover for the confirmation of the agenda that starts on page 2? Mover Councillor Downard, seconded Councillor Nicol. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Any disclosures of interest, additional disclosures that haven't been noted previously or in relation to any of the items on the agenda? No? All right, we'll move on to our confirmation of minutes section. So the first minutes are, this is section 5.1 on page 7 of your agenda pack. This was the minutes of the 9th of February council meeting. Do I have a mover that we are confirming these? So do I have a mover that these are Councillor Marr, Councillor Hodge, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. On to 5.2. This is page 13, the open minutes for our council meeting of the 23rd of February 23. Confirming those minutes. Mover in Councillor Hughes, second in Councillor Strange. Happy to second this. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we now move on to the committees reporting to council. The first one on page 24 of the agenda pack. This is the CERT Committee, CE Employment and Remuneration Committee. I'm happy to move those as true and correct. Do I have a second? Councillor Clarkson, you happy to second? Or Councillor Hughes?
Madam Chief, can I just ask a
Yes.
question? Why does council confirm the minutes as true and correct in relation? Should they not be the committee themselves that confirm the minutes as true and correct? It's in my view, inappropriate for a committee if it's not committee. Should, you've got a committee who is a committee that's
I understand your point.
yeah.
Okay.
This is a long-held convention. The reason that this occurs is the minutes of the subcommittees, we only confirm the minutes where it's our members. So all of the members on CERT are members of the council. We have no externals. And the reason this has been done in the past is simply for the time between meetings. The confirmation occurs quite quickly. If we go back to CERT, we'd be waiting a number of months for those to be confirmed. But obviously it's a convention that can be looked at if the council wishes to do so.
With great respect, I think it's totally inappropriate for me to sit here and because I won't, sit here and approve something that I wasn't there at. And I'm not a member of this committee, and therefore I should not be confirming those minutes as true and correct. It's against standard convention and written by will.
I understand. Councillor Hughes?
As the chair of this committee, I can confirm that it's been circulated to me and I've given approval for it. It's true and correct.
This is cert, not.
Oh, sorry, I was at that
finance,
meeting
but-
as well, and
Yeah.
so,
And Chair, I fully appreciate that, but I'm just saying that I think it's against convention, or wider convention, so.
Councillor Nevon?
Look, I'm of the same view, but reality is if we wait for some of these committees to approve their own minutes, we're gonna hold the whole process up, and as long as Dave and your team are circulating the draft minutes to the chairs of the committees, and those chairs are circling around their members and saying, hey, you guys all happy that there's a hunky-dory, then I think we've just gotta keep rolling, but certainly if, and I think those that were present at those meetings need to be the movers and seconders.
Yeah, exactly.
But I get where you're going, Noel, and I would be down this track as well, but it just becomes practical to hold the whole process up.
So are the majority happy that we continue with the current, I'm looking for nods of heads,
Yeah,
yes?
my view is the same as Stuart. Clyde and I got our minutes as draft. We went through them. If we thought there was a problem, we just went out to the research committee.
Yeah.
Then we sent it back.
Yeah.
And it's true, but when we come to this, if somebody from that committee could do the moving and passing, personally, I don't see a problem.
Yeah, that was the point I wanted to make. I think as long as the people who move and second, and actually the people who were party to the meeting vote, and the rest should just stay out of the
Yeah, that's right.
All right, okay, so I think we've got general consensus that we'll continue with the current contention. So I've got, I do. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. We'll record that Councillor Smith has abstained. All right, we'll move on to item 6.2. This is page 27 of your agenda pack. This is the Finance and Services Committee. Councillor Hughes, would you like to? Oh, so we've got section A and section B, so do them all together. All right. Happy to move these, and we've got a secondary, Councillor Strange. Just noting the section B item, which is put forward for approval by council. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we'll now move to the minutes of the Climate Action Committee. This is page 37 of your agenda pack. Councillor Nichol?
Yeah, happy to move. Was circulated around the committee and was happy to.
Happy to see.
And a second, and Councillor Downard. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we're now on page 43, item 6.4. This is the Strategy and Policy Committee. Again, we have a series of section A's and one section B. Councillor Marr?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Marr, seconded by Councillor Hughes. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. Now 6.5, this is page 52, the Environmental Performance Committee.
I'll move.
Carolina is moving. Do we have a second? Councillor Clarkson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we now move into section 7, which is the committee's reporting to council. So just refreshing, I remember, because you just talked about that committees that include externals, we're just receiving these, right? We're not confirming them.
That's correct. We only have been confirming the minutes where the committee is solely membership of council members that are in the room at the moment or not. The committees that we receive are the minutes committees where we have external members such as the external chairs, our EB partners, joint committees such as Regional Transport and Future Proof. Today we've put forward a resolution to receive all of those minutes and note the section A decisions that they made under authority. Any section B items for council to consider we will do after this as a separate item, just for the ease of distinguishing between the two.
Great. So we've got a sort of a cumulative motion there for receiving the minutes from Tuparitua Māori Trust Board and Waikato Regional Council Co-Governance Committee, the Future-Proof Implementation Committee, the Regional Transport Committee, and the Risk and Assurance Committee, and that the Section A decisions are noted. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder and Councillor Donar? Oh, sorry.
I just, for correctness, I just thought I'd let people know I emailed, one of the democracy advisors, which talked about relating to the meeting, and just removed it because I was online and stuff. Just so you guys know.
And I have checked with
Yeah.
Democracy and they have changed that.
Thank you.
Great. All right, all those in favor? Did I do that yet? Yes? Opposed? Carried. All right, now we go, so this is 7.2, isn't it? Am I on 7.2, page 70? Which is the Section B item for future proof. This is the tours for the future proof including the tours for the committee, including the tours for the regional transport. Okay. Mark, do I need you to speak to this, or is everybody happy with where we're at on this? All right. Okay.
Sorry, Madam
Yes.
Chairman, was the tours changed for Oliver?
Yes, you can, right, so you can see in the blue that one person nominated by a representative of CCS Disability Action in an advisory non-voting capacity is appointed to the Regional Transport Committee. So we've noted that there, all right? So, do you want to move that, or Councillor Strange? I'll go ahead and second that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. Are we on to section 8? Great. So we're now, section 8.1, which is the health and safety report. We're on page 132 of your agenda. You'll note that Fabulous Democracy Dave has put agenda page, whatever, at the top of every page of our pack, so we don't get confused when reports have different pages. So we're on 132, and we welcome Stuart Brown to the table. Welcome, Stu.
Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me,
Yeah. Anything you'd like to draw our attention to in specific?
Yeah, the first thing just was to clarify, I've talked a couple of times just about the PCBU training, and we're going to tack that on to.
Can I get you to bring that mic just a little bit closer?
Yep, there you go. We talked about the PCBU training that was coming up for council, and that is going to be scheduled in the next 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll have engaged EMA and a lawyer to come from there to provide that to you guys, so that will be coming up. I guess in regards to the report, I'll take that as read. The first section there really around the Fulton Hogan issue with the lorry driver, there were fines in regards to that. That is one of our critical risk areas in the organisation, dealing with contractors, and we'll take it really seriously, and we have actually developed an in-house e-learning module for all of the key staff across WRC to actually take part in, so they know the obligations that are required when engaging with contractors. So we feel that we're doing a good job in that space, and we understand our obligations. So that's in regard to the contractor safety. Moving on through, you'll see the incidents. This time around, there were a couple more. We seem to be having a number of vehicle incidents over the last few months that are fault internally, which is good, but I guess it's concerning out there on the roads. It's a bit like wacky races. You'll see that we've had another overtake on a blind corner, so less than ideal, and that's been followed up. That was actually with an external company, engaged with them directly on that, and they've dealt with it. The other thing just to note was the waiting in water. There was an instance there where someone was out in floodwater and put in a report that they got Campylobacter, but we didn't attribute that to work. That was something that was picked up from family. I'm not sure whether they have a dodgy Indian or what, but that came from that. So it was just to bring that to your attention, and we've followed up to let them know that if anything like that happens in the future, we'll require them to attend the doctor so we can actually confirm where that was from. And moving on again, I mentioned last time that we were having a bit of a drive this year, more than before, on the staff influenza vaccination. So that's underway, and I guess we have now confirmed that Natasha Jones will be available if any of you guys would like to take that offer up. She'll be able to provide you with a top picture on that. So that was really it from the health and safety report. I'm not sure if you have any questions on that.
Councillor Strange?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Stu, for your report. I note in February that we had a threat of an incident at the Transport Centre.
Yeah.
Is this reflected in this report?
It's not, no, that was something we just dealt with as an executive, I guess. So we haven't, that wasn't a direct threat to us, that was in the community kind of thing. That was the rumble, I guess, we had at the last council meeting when we were dealing with that. So that wasn't directly targeted at WRC, that was just in the facility. I guess we managed that with the transport centre and our building owner here, and that was, thankfully nothing came of it, but it was a pretty significant disruption for our director.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that it's reported and that staff's wellbeing, psychological harm is reported as well.
Yep.
I know that they possibly did have to relocate here because City Safe vacated the transport centre as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're just keen for there to be a bit more robust report going on that one.
That's okay, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Good morning, and then this is a question outside the square in theory. Over the last couple of days, I've seen a whole lot of letters of complaint that is quite degrading, and especially, to the council itself. But of course, there are staff involved in writing up of some of these reports. Does that get reported anywhere in health and safety? Because I would think mentally, some of these complaint letters are not good.
Yeah, no,
Just a question.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, and I guess we do get those on an ongoing basis, unfortunately. It's par for the course when you operate in this kind of organisation. One of the risks that you'll see in the report is that psychological harm, and that hasn't been identified as a critical risk. But we actually currently have that under review at the minute to see if that's going to change. So we are taking that quite seriously and looking at that for the future. Yeah.
Councillor Smith?
Just to speak to Councillor Strange's point, I think it should be recorded as a near miss at least. So it is in there, because obviously there was stress and otherwise for those staff, and if they were relocated, some positive action was taken by the organisations. And whilst not directly involving this with staff, so I think a near miss would be suffice.
Well, yeah, so I have no issue with that. I guess to explain that situation, unfortunately the communication was really poor between Hamilton City Council, the police and ourselves, and also GOBUS. So Mark has done quite a bit of work on that to ensure that that's improved going forward. The move to actually relocate people from the building wasn't one of safety, it was just a general feeling. The police were completely confident that they had the situation under control and advised that we had no need to remove our staff. Hamilton City Council decided that they would, and unfortunately didn't talk to us about that. So when we found that out, we thought, from a caring perspective, certainly bring the staff over to the main building and ensure that they feel comfortable with that. But there was no actual requirement to do that.
I appreciate that, if I may, Madam Chair, is that there's a cause and effect.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't deemed necessary by the police,
Yeah.
the organisation took a positive action.
Yes.
So therefore, in my view, it should be at the minimum a near miss, because that action, whilst probably not necessary, according to the police, it did prevent some harm or potential harm or psychological harm. So it's a non-event, but at least it's recorded.
Yeah, I'm totally happy to accept that and put that in the report and update it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, is this conversation recorded so that we've got some, as NCBU, the governors, is the detail of this conversation recorded?
Yep.
Thank you.
Live streamed and recorded as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other, oh, yes.
Yeah, just following on from Councillor Smith's request, could the minutes actually reflect that the question was asked and answered, please? Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Stu? If not, can I have a mover to receive the health and safety report for February 23? Councillor Downard, seconding Councillor Smith. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome, Mr. CE.
Apologies for lateness.
No worries. Oh, should we have noted that in the minutes? And the apologies just to council members? It's just a question. All right, so we now move on to item 8.2. This is on page 137 of your agenda pack. This is the adoption of the Waikato Regional Council 2023 to 2025 strategic direction. We've got Karen Bennett to take us through this paper. Did you want to start? Or?
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind ourselves, this is obviously a very important document because it helps set the direction of this council and particularly to help inform the LTV process going forward. Staff across the organisation have worked really hard, taken on board your comments previously and gone out widely to stakeholders to get feedback, which Karen will report on. Thanks.
Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair, and to my councillors. Thanks very much for all your time and energy into the review and update of the Waikato Council, Waikato Regional Council Strategic Direction. We have reviewed the 10-year strategy and updated it to reflect this council's priorities for this term. It will be 2023 to 2025, covering those calendar years. So we have been out to our EB partners, to stakeholders, to the public, and to subject matter experts on staff. And as we've gone through this process, we have updated and incorporated the feedback, and you'll see this in your final document that's in your agenda pack here today for adoption. Some of the key changes that you'll notice are in response to iwi partners who requested that we focus more closely on Te Mana o Te Wai, Te Mana o Te Awa, in the context, the reasons why we are focusing on water as a priority. We also had feedback from iwi partners that they wanted to see some slight tweaks to that design element we have, the poem, that is going to become an integral part of our brand story in the front of your document there. We have had considerable feedback from stakeholders that they wanted to see us emphasise our engagement processes, that they wanted to see us emphasise the evidence base and to communicate our science in more accessible ways. So we're talking to people rather than scientists was the feedback. And so that has become a new priority in your, or a new goal in your priority for community connections. So working through the priorities, we have carried forward from the previous strategic direction, water, biodiversity and biosecurity, and coastal and marine. Looking at the waves of change and the drivers of change, you have asked us to evolve, and this has been supported by iwi partners and stakeholders,
priorities relating to infrastructure. So that has become sustainable development and infrastructure. This allows us to focus on the need to increase our resiliency, to look forward to the spatial planning that's coming in, and to look at sustainability across our whole region at a spatial scale. We've also evolved transport connections to community connections, and this is to acknowledge the need for us to look at social cohesion, recognizing that we have to enable people to participate fully in their society, to be able to access transport services that get them to health, to education, to social life. We've also we've had some communication with the Disabled Persons Assembly, looking at how do we increase accessibility of services. And then you'll see from the very first iteration of this strategic direction, there are 2 new goals in that community connections priority.
And they relate to working with our councils, our local councils, the city and the districts, to get really close to our communities. This is feedback we heard from yourselves and also from our councils, but also from iwi partners and stakeholders. We all have to work as local government to connect with communities. And the other goal related to this science, make science accessible, make information more readily available to all people so everyone can understand the direction our communities can go in together. And then finally, we moved a broad priority of climate to more specifically about the transition to a low emissions economy. And this allowed us to focus more keenly on the areas where we can make a difference and to work with the sectors to actually transition to a new way of doing business. In that, we also picked up feedback from all our stakeholders. So I present now to you for adoption your strategic direction for 23 to 25. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Karen. I know we've spent quite a lot of time, both as a council and as staff, to pull this together. I appreciate the way we utilized social media and our website to invite comment back from the wider community. I think that was really positive, and also have appreciated the multiple conversations we've had, both yourself, Chris, and myself, directly with iwi, but also through our JMA agreement, or sorry, our JMA committees, and through staff. Getting that input from iwi and buy-in from iwi has been really helpful in developing something that I think leads us well into our long-term planning process. Are there any comments or questions or points of clarification? We all good? Nice. I've got a mover in Councillor Nicol, second in Councillor Strange, that we receive the report and adopt the direction. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Well done. Well done. Yes? Sorry.
When are we able to distribute it?
Thank you for asking. We have all the material ready to go for this afternoon, now that we've got your adoption. Thank you.
Nice.
If I may, Madam Chair, Karen, just before you leave, so there is the main document that's been produced. There'll be a summary document as well, which councillors will be able to use to...
May I clarify? Yes, thank you. So we have a policy now for these big documents are digital first, so we don't print a whole lot. So we have a printed summary document for you to use. We've also prepared a PowerPoint that you can take anywhere you wish if you want to talk to your stakeholders and your constituents. And there's also a new web presentation for you to send people to a new link. So, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. All right, we are now on to item 8.3. This is page 161, the revised standing orders. Now, we did have a couple, did we have a couple of workshops? I think we did have a couple of workshops on that. Just one? Just one workshop? On this, so we have been through this. Did you I'll go straight to Neville if you would like to introduce the item.
Kia ora no koutou. This is correct, Chair. There was a workshop held with councillors on the 21st of November, and a full explanation and understanding of the process, particularly in relationship to the use of the LGNZ template. As the report outlines, this requires 75% of members to vote in favour of the changes that have been made. The changes are outlined in the analysis section of the report under section 15, what those incorporate. Should the Council choose not to adopt these proposed standing orders, then the current ones that are in place will stand. I really don't have much more to add. The report's very substantive and provides all of the information I think that's relevant, but I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor Smith.
Madam Chair, can we put page 213 up on the board, please? 213. Whoever's controlling that. So, page 213, 20.11, electronic devices at meetings. The reality is I know what this is trying to achieve, but I've just noted 3 members looking at their own phones, doing whatever they need to do. So this makes a mockery of this particular statement. So I believe that the first line should be removed. Electronic devices can only be used to advance the business of the meeting. The reality is, for the last 6 months, that's nonsense. We've all looked at our phones, we've all left the meeting. So to be pedantic like that and to be pulled up for something that we commonly do with respect to our colleagues, I think should be removed, that first line. And I have no problem with personal use may only occur at the discretion of the chair. Well, that's implied until it's taken away under current, common practice. So I know I'm being pedantic, but the reality is if you're putting standing orders in place, which everyone ignores, then there is no point in having standing orders. So can we just make this a little bit more realistic? So personal use may occur with respect to the meeting or something like that.
So you're suggesting removing that first sentence?
Absolutely, remove the first one and modify the second. I haven't actually concocted a replacement, but I think personal use may occur so as not to disrupt the meeting, and then the chair may require that the device is switched off. I think that's fair, but that then reflects what is actually happening in practice. To me, these things have got to be meaningful, and if we ignore them, what's the point? So I'm just being pedantic and tricky, but the reality is that's what these things can be used against you, and let's not set ourselves up to fail.
Right, so we're suggesting removing that first sentence, having the second sentence read, personal use may only occur so as not to disrupt the meeting, and then removing at the discretion of the chair, and the chair may require electronic device, that an electronic device is switched off, so that the rest of it stands. All right, would have been helpful to have gotten these suggestions ahead of now, so we're not drafting in the meeting, but that's all right. Yeah. Some of us were on a fabulous bus tour with the Integrated Catchment Management crew yesterday. Councillor Downard, did you want to make a comment?
I'd just like to note that Councillor Smith has been pedantic. I mean, you could go through this. And I appreciate that you're an expert in standing orders, Councillor Smith, but, going through this whole document, I mean, it's like a Bible. You can interpret it in different ways. I mean, I interpreted that first line as if I've got extra information on my phone that is pertinent to this meeting, that it might be either an email from a contingent or something like that. I haven't seen out of this 5 months that I've been in council, anyone rude with a phone ringing and going off out of especially full council meetings. That might happen in a workshop where, everyone appreciate everyone's got business. But yeah, I think that's been prevented. Yeah.
But I suppose I'm happy to support that change. I think that it does allow a recognition that we all do tend to glance at our devices as we go through the day. The number of days and hours we spend in this chamber, it almost becomes part of how you get through this job, is being able to ensure that other parts of your life are ticking on as well. So we've got the change and we've got that noted. Any other, Councillor Nicol?
Yeah, there was one, 13.11. I just wanted to ask a question about what that meant. I'll have to flip through it myself because it said it. I just didn't understand it. Where a member is at a place that makes their physical presence at a meeting impractical or impossible. So you mean, say if they're not here, then you can be online, is kind of what that's saying. Is that correct? Dave was nodding, so
yeah,
I think I got my answer. It just seemed like a very roundabout saying of when you're at home, they're obviously going to be online. Yeah. Or such things. Okay, thanks, just to clarify that. And the other point I wanted to make was just mindful that, these are our standing orders and they deviate, at times from how other councils do things, and I want them to really work for this council. 9.8 and 9.10 talk about the public inspection of agenda or distribution of agenda of at least 2 working days. That's the local government requirement. I personally have always wanted it to be a little bit longer to allow us more time to read it. This week was a prime example where we had 2 really full days for a lot of councillors, where I wonder where, other than if you're going to give up your weekend, where are you going to read it? So if the council had any interest in it, we can make that 3 days and we can ask our staff, what implications does that make for you? But my understanding is there's quite a rush with that staff go through to get these ready on time, but that same rush can happen 1 day earlier or 1 day later. It just depends on what we as a council want. So I could invite Chris to just make a comment in case that helps new councillors, just putting it on the table.
Yes, I'm not too sure what the 2 days comes from, if that's an LGNZ, I'm looking at Marley for suggestion. I think that our practice is to try and get agendas out. We like to have it with you for 5 days in advance, if that's possible. Sometimes it's not always possible, but that is Marley, that's our practice.
Sorry, I've noted your...
Kia ora tātou. Yes, just confirming, Chris, your understanding of what our current practice is. We do aim to get agendas distributed 5 working days in advance. The 2 working days is a legislative minimum time frame that is set out in Lagoima. And so that's why it's been carried over to the LGNZ template. And so the other point is, Councillor Nicol, you're quite right, we can amend our own set of standing orders to set a minimum that might be greater than what is in legislation. In terms of implications, we could probably meet that expectation of 3 working days, given that we aim for 5, but it might mean that there could potentially be addendums, that's right, increase in addendums, because from time to time there are individual topics that require a little bit more time to, I guess, finalise before it's circulated within the agenda.
Yes, so I'm not too precious about it, just thought I'd put it out there for councillors to make a comment. Yeah.
All right, Councillor Smith, did you have an additional?
Well, no, I just wanted to clarify that what I talked about under 20.11 was I didn't see the full change up on the board, but is that to be inserted later?
We'll note it in the motion. We'll note the change. Any changes we'll note in the motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes?
I'd just like to endorse the current policy. I think it's obviously an honest and sustained effort by staff to get these out as soon as possible, and that's certainly appreciated. And I don't think we should be too prescriptive in putting pressure on, because I'd much rather have the full agenda and all the information once rather than coming in bits and pieces. So as far as I'm concerned, 2 days is fine if that's what it is, but acknowledging the efforts of staff to get it out on a more timely basis.
And just on that point, Madam Chair, if I may, the further we push it back, the further the staff have got to go, and then the timeliness and the issue may be superseded. So, yeah.
All right. Oh, yes, Councillor Nipan?
Just noting and acknowledge your points, Chris. I used to find particularly when chairing ICM, if there was a particular big agenda item, often it was ready weeks before the agenda, but there was all the other rats and mice that had to come into the agenda, and I'd often say to Greg, hey, can we just flick that one out a few weeks earlier just so everyone can get their head around it, and
yeah.
Particularly as a chair as well,
Yeah.
and I'm sure staff are happy to keep that process going. It makes life a lot easier, but doesn't constrain us to the other issues here.
Great, great. Yeah.
Last comment would be, because while we had a session on this in November, it was more of a getting taught what the standing orders are currently rather than a workshopping of it. If we'd had more of a workshopping of it, I would have thought that we'd go more in depth on whether some of our workshops are open to the public, or whether some of our briefing section of that is made available to the public, so they get the benefit of a whole lot of really great presentations that we get. But at this point in time, I know that what we've got is working, so happy to carry on like that. But at some point, if there's a desire out there to look at that again, I think we should bring it up.
Great, thanks. All right. Okay, can we bring up a motion? So we've got that the report is received, that council adopts the revised standing orders, and noting the changes to section. So this is where we're making the change you brought forward, Councillor Smith. So noting the changes to section 20.11 so that it now reads, the first sentence is personal use I think we have to say personal use of electronic devices, just for correct grammar. Personal use of electronic devices at meetings may only occur so as not to disrupt the meeting, full stop. And then continuing on with a chair may require that an electronic device is switched off if, etc. All right. Do we have a mover in that? Councillor Smith, and a second. Councillor Clarkson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Fantastic. All right. We'll now move on to section 8.4. This is on page 247. While Greg is settling into the chair there, can I just extend our thanks again to yourself, Greg, and the team of Integrated Catchment, along with the other fabulous staff, Mark Tamura and Mike Scarsbrook, who and the extended team that joined us yesterday for that fantastic tour of essentially the parts of the Waikato district and into the Waihaupioco, helping us to get to grips with all the complexity and all the challenges that, in particular, your team has faced in the face of some pretty turbulent weather patterns over the summer. but also just in terms of what your work does, you and your team's work does to protect our communities and to enable our productive capacity of land. So thank you for all that you and your team put into putting that together for us. It was much enjoyed, and the weather was beautiful, so.
Well planned, and we even planned some roosting birds to be sitting there as well. So, but look, the team really appreciate getting out on site and showing you what they do. Yeah.
Great, good stuff. All right, so on with our agenda items. So this is the Muggeridge's Pump Station. So we put pause on this last month so that we could go back and have some additional conversations with the landowners that were going to be directly affected by this this decision and gather a bit more information. So Greg, is there anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So just to recap for councillors, so there have been a couple of reports prepared for council mid-February and end of February. So I won't recap the information in there. This is the supplementary report to that. And at the last meeting, council did endorse several things in principle, including using the surplus, current prior year surplus to offset the general rate contribution of 15% for the state, and also looking to set aside the canal costs for now on the anticipation that there may be a future option that may involve that canal and that may need further consideration by council. So subsequent to this, council did request that we meet with two groups, one being the former members of the Flood Protection Advisory Subcommittee for Hauraki, and the other being the direct beneficiary landowners. Both of those meetings were held in mid-March, and to appreciate and acknowledge the attendance from councillors Cookson, Smith and Dunbar-Smith as well to help us to have those conversations. It's fair to say that obviously no one is happy to be in this situation, but what you'll see in my report is there was an acknowledgement that from a point of view of the options put forward, options 1, 2 or 3, that option 1 was the one that was certainly favoured, as opposed to putting more pressure on the direct beneficiary landowners who still need to obviously work through some options for their drainage challenges that haven't gone away. But I'll leave it there. I mean, it's a reasonably self-explanatory report, and certainly provide the opportunity for other councillors to talk who are directly involved in those conversations. But just noting that our staff recommendation has remained as option 1, noting those other principles to offset those costs.
Great.
Thank you,
All right, I'm going to go to Councillor Cookson first as the chair of ICM, then I'm going to go to Councillor Smith as the deputy chair, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Dunbar-Smith. So as you were the 3 that were involved in those meetings, I'd like you to have the opportunity to share your views.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At both those 2 meetings, both meetings, option 1 was chosen because it was the easiest rat to swallow. I suppose is how the community would have said it.
That probably is exactly how they would have said it.
They also asked that we come back and sort of see if we could get more contribution from the general rate. That's up to this group here to decide. They think they're unfairly treated in their situation of Muggeridge's has been a situation of that catchment for 30 years, which they don't believe they've, council and Hauraki haven't met the level of service in that catchment. So they've been disadvantaged over that time of drainage and service to the floodgate and the pump, which in that situation, there is a document that talks about that's come up, that's it's only to staff, and Hauraki wouldn't release that document because it's a document of staff only. So
you saying that's a report from Hauraki District Council?
Hauraki and Regional Council, that's staff only. So they weren't prepared to release that without us agreeing to it as well. So that document has to be left where it is until I think next time we discuss what happens with the canal. If there is a level of service that's not been met,
that deduction could come out of the cost of the canal when it lies at that time. It's sort of the speak that the other discussions I've had with the landowners in the last 2 weeks, that they would like that if there is a level of service that's not been met, that cost could come out of those targeted catchment, Muggeridge catchment in the future, if there is a situation where we haven't met their level of service. And I think that was said on the night as well, Greg. Yeah, it's not a good place to be. We had to take it on the nose that night, and we had to say that these things weren't going to occur again. To the best of our ability, we weren't going to let these scenarios happen again because the community can't afford it. And as you all went out on that bus trip yesterday, you know that the Piaka River scheme is the poor scheme in the system, and these debts can't afford to be laid on it because it has got the oldest pumping stations, and all those ones are all in the future, all the ones that have got to be upgraded. So there's a huge cost in the future coming to this catchment, and they can't afford to have debt that can't be that they aren't getting a service level from. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and just acknowledge that, so it is a complex system, definitely, and part of the project to date has been to look at that level of service and what's been required. One of the big challenges with Muggeridge is to actually get the water from the drainage areas to our outlets. Just for the benefit of councillors, the Hauraki District Council looks after the drainage network, and we look after the outlets through to the Piaka River. So it is a complex system, and there's definitely challenges there. And certainly I've got staff undertaking to investigate any other concerns that we raised during those meetings. So.
In that, it's the level of service is also not it's that catchment has never ever had the floodgate or the pumping to service the area correctly, as that's one discussion that's been brought up. So that needs to be investigated in the future, that it's not just they've never actually had the right capacity to the catchment, as one discussion that's got. And I think we must investigate that and prove that right or wrong, because that's a part of the level of service issue that they've got on that Muggeridge catchment. So where that goes, I don't know which side, who's right or wrong, but I think it needs to be calculated out and see if there is any merit behind that. Thank you.
Great. All right. I'm sure you've got that noted on your to-do list.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. You good, Robbie? All right. I've got a
Just
Councillor
supporting
Smith.
Thank you. Just supporting the comments from Robbie. In the Pyro meeting, which was the scheme, we had one landowner who wasn't part of that. Sorry, he might have been one of the reps, but the majority of were not landowners. And they came to the conclusion of option one much more quickly and probably accepting the situation. So when we attended the Ngātia meeting, it was a very hostile crowd, and there was a good selection of probably 15, 20 people, landowners, and I think and they were quite vocal towards staff. And I think to the credit of the three of us, we directed that to us really, and probably easier for us because we're all newly elected to the council, and we kept bringing them back to the issue and how we were going to address it rather than the peripheral issues. But one of the issues that Robbie's already touched on is that they did ask for consideration of a higher than the 15% or 14.25. Because of the background issues to this, and we said that we would bring that back and absolutely ask council to consider it rather than just wipe it under the table and say, yep, heard you, but no. The other issue, level of service, and just to help Robbie there, there is an absolute concern that where council had set level of service around this area, that throughout the period of the last 25, 30 years, that council has never matched the level of service that it had put in place. And so this is a big exercise if one is to go back and look at the level of service at each change, because it's not the level of service now, it's how it's progressed over time. And then I made that to them. I said, this is not about now, it's about the history. And if you want that, big exercise. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether we want to request staff to do that or whether we bite the bullet and sort of encapsulate that into the final figures that we land on. And I've talked about the 15%. Needless to say, come the end of the meeting, I was very happy where we got to, in that the landowners in particular, I think they felt that they had been listened to and they had actually been heard, and they came up to all three of us and even the staff and thanked us for coming and listening to their concerns. And I think that's about the true representation model. We represent them, respect their views, and articulate their concerns around this table. So, yeah, the debate on some of these questions is to come, but I think it was a very beneficial process. Thank you.
And I certainly heard from a number of people how much it was appreciated that the three of you turned up and that staff were there as well. There was certainly, while the subject matter was challenging, there was acknowledgement of the willingness of the three of you as councillors as well as the staff members to show up and allow them to be heard. So so I certainly have heard that myself as well. Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Yeah, just picking up Noel's point there. In February, we arrived at this, and it was pretty clear that this was something the previous council had decided and left to us to administer, and it was difficult because it seems so unfair that you pay for something that you haven't got, and that was certainly the genesis of the meeting. I think it was very good to go back and communicate with them and talk with them. They still feel they're paying for something they didn't get. And they would like the general ratepayers to pay for the whole thing, and they're not happy with the government pulling out at that time. It was a lesson in going and speaking with people, and of the options that they had available, they still preferred the one where the general Piako ratepayers paid for a greater portion than themselves. And so I think we got somewhere in what is an invidious situation. So I think we've done the best we can, and the end of the meeting there seemed to be agreement from them that this was, in the worst of all situations, the best option that they could come up with. So yeah.
Councillor Clarkson.
Yes, just following on from the comments of Councillor Cookson, could somebody enlighten us about the existence of this staff-only report? Because it does seem to me that it's germane to the decision, particularly in relation to the proportion of general rate and the use of the surplus, in the sense that if there is some, it's almost like there's some liability being proposed here that has not currently been addressed. So I'm just concerned with that, to hear of a staff-only report, that it sounds to me as germane to the decision that we're going to be making, that if it exists and whether or not, why would it not be able to be shared with councillors?
So, through you, Madam Chair, I'm not aware of that specific report, so I'd have to follow that up. The only comment I can provide around level of service is the general advice that I've been provided is the primary problem is around moving water through the catchment to the outlets as opposed to the outlets, but I think we will need to follow up on that particular report and provide council with some information on that.
So I guess I'm not really clear now about what's in this report specifically and how it specifically relates to this particular decision, because you're right, if there is if this is a report that somehow sheds some additional information
Yeah.
that we needed to consider in making this decision, then that's an issue.
Well, it could imply some liability.
I'm not clear, Councillor Cookson, on what you think is in this report and where it's
But what I understand, it's a document that explains that the level of service hasn't been met. So it's about that we haven't got the water has not got to the floodgate or the pump and the floodgate aren't big enough for the catchment. That's what the document is about. So our level of service over the last 30 years in that scenario hasn't been met because we've had a catchment of 2,000 hectares or say, and it should have only been that catchment with the floodgate and the pump should only been 1,500 hectares. So we've never met what they're saying is that the level of service has never been met because the catchment is bigger than what it was designed to take. That's by what I understand is what the document says. So we've never been able to meet the level of service.
And so how that connects with this decision that is before us is that.
So, I mean, through you, Madam Chair, I mean, the two issues could be separated because obviously we have been collecting
Okay, but I want to
rates,
make sure if they can be separated, I want to
yeah.
make sure we're clear how they are separate.
Yeah, because, I mean, I guess this is, suggesting that what we've been rating for over the past few decades has not met that expectation. Yes, I'm not aware of the details in the report. I do have our Waihapiako Zone Manager, Jody Kosian, online as well, and she wasn't aware of any specifics. But I guess all I can provide is our commitment to follow that up as a separate matter to this particular challenge. I guess the challenge does remain with the debt, but they could be easily two separate issues that we could deal with as council.
Okay, I just want to make sure you're happy. Sorry, I'll come back to you, Robbie, but just Bruce want to make sure.
I can turn mine off, Madam Chair, as long as you come back to me.
Oh, yep, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, well, I'd just like I guess, people who've been more deeply involved in this to explain whether, in fact, the issues can be separated, because I'm sort of, the way I heard it is there could be potential implication, both in relation to how we partition the cost here and future liability. So I'm just, just need to know about this stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
If I could just make a comment that I guess the whole reason for why Mugridges was wanted was there was a concern that something wasn't working well enough in an existing scheme. So I'm trying to work out what's behind, it wouldn't be happening if there was a current, if people were very happy with the level of service, as to whether there's a liability that council needs to be aware of if they make a decision. That's the question, I think, on the table, Greg, and we probably need to be able to have you be reasonably definitive about that. With respect to the comments about the general rate contribution, I just might be helpful if I just say I have asked staff that, is there other precedents and why is it that this is recommended? Now, my understanding is when the scheme was initially devised, these things were thought up the front of how it would be funded. And so otherwise it probably wouldn't have had a decision to go ahead at the time if that hadn't been sorted out. So, and I understand this is still within the bounds of the original decision to go ahead, and I'm looking for you to clarify if that's the case or not, Greg. And I note that there is a 15% general contribution from all ratepayers in the region, as well as the recommendation that be spread across the scheme. But Greg, can you be more definitive? Are we aware of any liabilities that could be made in making a decision along the lines of the staff recommendation?
So I can be definitive. At this point in time, I'm not aware of any liability in terms of level of service for our assets. But as I said, I can undertake to follow that up to ensure that is the case. I mean, the Mugridges project did come about because the catchment has changed over the decades, particularly due to peat settlement, and is expected to continue the change and expand because of the settlement that's happening within the catchment and within the drainage network. So I think that is the primary issue that Mugridges was attempting to address. It wasn't only a pump station, it was also additional drains to bring the water from the catchment to the pump. And so that is, I guess, all I can offer at this stage, Madam Chair. And as I said, the advice that I've heard is that I've received is that it is primarily about the drainage network bringing water to our outlets as opposed to our outlets. But I will make a commitment to ensure that that is the case. And in terms of the funding, question was asked around the funding policy. So there was a funding policy adopted as part of this project, which is outlined in the report. And what we're looking at today is, I guess, an adjustment to that to use the Piaka River Scheme rate as an acknowledgement that an asset hasn't been created, and therefore this is the fairest outcome that we believe is staff for the community.
All right, just in terms of speaking order, I've got Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Smith, Councillor Cookson, Councillor Clarkson. Happy with that? Councillor Kneebone.
Look, I think the document that Robbie's referring to needs to be looked into, but I don't think it should be part of the decision we've got to make today. Otherwise, we're going to be here for a really, really long time. And I suspect that whether it's a document or concerns, that could probably apply to other parts of the catchment as well. So that's just my thoughts here. But I'm still happy with the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Stu,
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I just quickly, so Jody, who's online, is also just reaffirmed that her understanding is that there is no issue around our level of service. But as I said, there's more information that comes to light. We will investigate that appropriately.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought Chris explained the situation quite well, which was in part answer to my question. To me, I see them as two separate issues. Somebody many years ago approved a system which was probably, in hindsight, inadequate, but it would have been accepted by all, and the costs at that time would have been identified, and that's what's being charged in the rates. We now have a totally different situation, which is what we're looking at in here. I don't think we should be trying to confuse the two. I think we have to be quite clear. We have got a proposal from the staff. We should approve it and get on with it. And if the system needs to be upgraded, it's a separate issue which should be addressed in the future, not tried to be litigated here today.
Right. All right, are we adding new information?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
But I sense there's a consensus in the room on that point, so I won't talk to that. There is one issue that I have omitted to address, and it was a commitment that I gave to those present at the landowners meeting. It was that they requested, in fact, I pondered a question to myself, which was taken up, and this is on item 3 in the staff recommendation of the 458,000. The recommendation at the moment is to park that and let it incur interest. I did say that I would bring the request from those landowners to look at funding that 458 out of the surplus and parking it rather than incurring interest for a period whenever it is determined, because the issue was not going to go away. But if the 458 was taken care of and parked, if a scheme is to be picked up later, that 458 could be transferred as a debt to that scheme, and there is a wish from those landowners that something is actually achieved. And I think from Robbie's talking with the Mayor of Hauraki, that is also the desire of the Hauraki Council. And so I said that I would put that on the table and as a request that the 458 is covered by the surplus as well and parked as a reserve to be shown as a debt to that scheme if it's picked up in the future. If it's not incurring interest, but will have to be dealt with by council at some stage. So that's another thing on the table. I'm sorry, but I omitted to bring it forward earlier. Thank you.
So I'm looking between you and Greg and Janine sitting over there. Just waiting for somebody to meet my eyes.
Thank you. I think you must have been reading my mind. So just for clarification, the suggestion is that a prior year surplus be used to cover the $450,000 with a promise that it might get revisited in the future if the scheme went ahead. Yeah. And so that would mean that interest payments on that component wouldn't be incurred in the interim. Yeah, so I'd probably have to look to Janine if she has any comment about that. I'm asking probably in respect of our own council's funding policies with respect to how these can be used.
Thanks, Chris, through you, Madam Chair. Probably the key point around that is that our prior year's surplus funds are all general rate funds. So it is out of step with the funding policy in this matter to do that. So that would be the key consideration that needs to be made. I think, as Councillor Smith has noted, the conversation around the canal is a very live topic with Hauraki District Council. So the avenue might be trying to actually resolve that as quickly as possible so we know what the way forward is, rather than sort of putting in the interim measure.
And look, I fully respect that, Madam Chair. The commitment was made to bring it forward, and of course council can, by resolution, override certain policies, and so if it was minded, or if we were minded to use that 450 to park that at the moment, I believe we can, whether there's an appetite, but I'm fulfilling the commitment that I made to those ratepayers. Thank you.
Respect that. I suppose I'd be really hesitant to make a decision that was contrary to a policy without a fully informed report as to what that decision might result in. So that's okay.
Greg was present on the night, so I did say it's known that I would be raising this on behalf of the constituents. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, so I think I've had explained to me to a pretty good extent, you know, the issues that I've raised, but I guess, and perhaps I've come to the view that the mystery report was a device in a negotiation. You know, I mean, why was the report raised? It was being used in the context of this decision-making process. But I would still eventually like to see that report, because it comes back to a principle of democracy. You know, if people point to a report and say it's a staff-only report, you know, I would have thought that it's something that we should be able to see. So, and just to reply to the comment by Stu, I was still intending to make the decision today. I'm just trying to help make sure that we're properly informed in our decision making. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I would still like to see the staff-only report.
Sure. And we've had the commitment from the director that these are separate issues, and that you'll be looking into this report and ensuring that it comes back either through the that's where it would come out, through ICM committee, so that councillors are confident that that they're across that information. All right. I've got Jennifer, and then I've got Mikhail.
Thank you. It's a question for Greg, and that is, your staff report talks about the opinion on behalf of staff is that the option 1 is the fairest option. Sorry, just give you the chance. Your staff is saying option 1 is the fairest option. I'm thinking that a constituent in Hamilton or Thames or Taupo or wherever that is further away from this project, looking at this report, would ask, okay, so in front of the councillors is an option of a 5% contribution from general rate or a 15% contribution. What would you give as the reasons for why you landed on the recommendation that you made around that specifically, the fairness and the work of the project that would justify the general rate going to 10%?
Sure. So the initial funding policy for Muggridge's, that's also detailed in the report, did acknowledge the potential benefit from the asset, to particularly the direct beneficiaries as well as the wider Hauraki Plains. The reason for recommending the use of the Piaka River scheme is that it does reflect that prior agreed funding policy that council has already worked through quite a substantial process during previous years in terms of looking at the benefits of the scheme to direct ratepayers as well as the broader community and the region. Given the nature of work that's undertaken, we believe that's the most appropriate because there is still value there for the Piaka River scheme and potentially in terms of the way forward with other options. So yeah, that's the reason that I would be putting forward.
But at the time when it was first, not first, but eventually landed on that funding policy, the contribution from the general rate was assessed as being fair at 5%. Why is it now fair at 15%?
The primary difference is that no capital asset was prepared. So the funding policy previously was around the establishment of an asset and the creation of benefit to that direct area. And so the realignment of funding proportions to reflect that benefit. Whereas what we have now is effectively incurring repayment of debt for, it's work that has been undertaken, but without the direct benefit being provided to that area. So the fallback position is that Piaka River scheme rate.
I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Can I just check also, Greg, that 15% general rate contribution isn't inconsistent with other scheme works and catchment schemes?
Each of our schemes does vary. I don't have those percentages to my mind, but they do. Like for example, Project Watershed is a lot more complex in terms of contributors, direct beneficiaries, general rate contribution, etc. But in all of our schemes, there is a general rate contribution in that sort of order of magnitude to recognise the broader benefit provided by our schemes.
All right. Councillor Downard.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to agree with Councillor Nebo. We've been through it. It's not something nice. I don't want to see a policy change unless, as you say, Madam Chairman, that we have a workshop on the ramifications of that. We've been over this with a couple of workshops, and I'd just like to do a notice of to move the recommend from the staff motion. Thank you.
All right, so we've got a mover and Councillor Downard. Councillor Nebo, did you want to second that? All right, I'll go to you, Councillor Cookson.
I agree it's got to be dealt with today, and we can't park it any longer. It's just, as I said earlier, as long as everyone's aware that I think in the future, when we get this information, if the level of service hasn't been dealt with, we deal with that at that time and either take it off the canal cost or we just or rate relief, one or the other. We've got to resolve that at the time. It doesn't stop today dealing with what it has to deal with because we can't afford those interest payments to keep collecting on the Piaka River scheme and at a cost to the scheme that it can't afford. One thing I'd like to say though is what some of you here might understand is why I call the Piaka River scheme the poor cousin too. If this had happened on the Waihau, these ratepayers here would be paying for that on the Waihau, but because the Waihau scheme, the Piako pays towards the Waihau, but the Waihau doesn't pay towards the Piako. And because I know on my farm I pay for all schemes, yet I'm miles away from the Waihau. So in some ways we get double hit on none of the Waihau schemes paying towards as a general rate, as a targeted rate into this, only the Piako. So that's where they feel really pinched and hurt, is if this had occurred on the Waihau, they would actually be paying towards it as targeted rate payers from the Piako. But it doesn't work the other way around. And that's just understanding why they feel that they're being unfairly treated. Because sorry to complicate it, but I just wanted to make you understand what my constituents feel, that if this had happened the other way around, we would have been paying the other way as well. Thank you.
Councillor Hodge, and then I would like to wrap this up.
I'm okay for 1 to 5. I'm not sure about 6, Greg, because this gives Hauraki District Council almost an option. Is if you don't want to pay, it's okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm not happy with that. I think we should emphasise somewhere that they should be paying, Yeah, I'm sorry, everything I'm happy with, 1 to 5, but I'm not keen on 6, sorry, unless there's a clause, yeah. I'm just not happy with 6, so I'll probably go against 6.
Can I just clarify, is there an option to remove 6, or what has led to 6 being in there?
Could I comment as the mover?
Oh.
Seconder?
Instead of, okay, I'll go to you, Stu, and then if you want to,
I don't see any harm in taking it out, because if that scenario evolves, we'll have to go there, and if we can't find any other way of dealing with it, then we'll have to deal with it. But so I don't see that taking it out is going to cause me trouble.
so you're happy to take it out? I'm just looking at the, sorry. The mover, are you happy to take that out? Because that's a fair point, that if they refuse,
It opens the door.
well, they refuse. Yeah,
It opens the door, Mike.
so there, it's still, the 5% for Hauraki District Council is denoted in 4C. It just removes that, yeah.
Can I just ask Greg to comment on that?
Yeah, so the advice we've had so far from Hauraki District is it's seen as a relatively simple matter to confirm that contribution. It's not a significant contribution from Hauraki District. I guess the inclusion of 0.6 there was just to cover eventualities, so that if something did happen, then we were able to proceed without needing to have a
Come
further
back
discussion.
for another
That's
decision.
right. Yeah, but as I said, we've had some very confident discussions with Hauraki around the process to confirm that contribution.
Well, if we're confident, then let's take it out. All right.
Madam
Yeah.
Chair, because of the commitment I made to that community landowners, I just want to put an amendment, and I'll test whether there's any support, that item 3, that the repayment of expenditure associated with the canal assessed at 458 be paid for from general rate surplus, and the interest element, so it's to prevent interest, and the matter be dealt with at a later time when the canal outcome is determined, or words to that effect.
And as noted, that is at odds with our current funding policy. So
Appreciate
Yep,
that,
yep.
but we
Yep.
can override
Yep.
our own policy.
Yes,
So
we can.
I'd like to test it, perhaps pro forma or whatever. Thank you.
I'd support that amendment.
No, look, I won't support that amendment, and could I just note with the greatest of respect, Noel, that I'm a bit concerned that you're proposing this in light of the knowledge that it is contrary to our funding policy.
can I get a show of hands? We're just going to do a straw poll on it, all right? Who is in support of that amendment? Who's in support? 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. All right, okay, we have a mover and a seconder for 1 through 5, removing number 6. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, with that, let's take a wee break, eh? 10 minutes. convene. Everybody's got their caffeine and their hydration. All right, we'll call the meeting back to order at 11:09. So we are now on item 8.5. 8.5, this is on page 253. This is the 2024-2034 long-term plan project development and group activity structure. We have Haven Walsh joining us. Were there any comments you wanted to start? You happy? All right, we'll just go straight to Haven. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, my name is Haven Walsh and I'm the Corporate Planning Manager. So essentially, as outlined, the purpose of this report is just to provide you an overview of the long-term plan, how we're looking to pull it together, and then cover off how the information will be monitored and reported to you and come to you for your decision making. The last part of the report is seeking your approval to the group of activity structure, and that's one of the first things that we always pull together when we review our long-term plan. So I'll just step through the report at quite a high level and then open up for any clarifying questions or comments. So I know that most of you will be familiar with the long-term plan through previous trienniums or also through your induction process, where I understand you had a good overview of the corporate planning cycle, how LTPs are pulled together, what they're for. But just a brief reminder, they're our 10-year plan. They map out everything we're going to do and how much it's going to cost for 10 years. So they'll set the rates for the 24-25 year, and then when we do the next two annual plans after that, that will be the benchmark that they're both compared back to. Yeah, and I guess essentially when we're trying to pull the long-term plan together, it's how we bring to life the strategic direction, which I understand was set this morning. Cool, so the next bit of the report covers off a bit about the deliverables or the components that will be brought to you for your decision making and information along the way. And then also how the project is structured. And we're not actually looking to change too much about how that was all done from last time. And then I guess, yeah, the last bit of the report is covering off that group of activities section. So it's outlined there, probably the best way to see it is in paragraph 19, where it steps through some of the changes. There's not much that's significant. There's just a few name changes to try and describe a better what those activities are doing. The group of activities mirrors our organisational structure quite closely. So what is called a group of activity is pretty closely aligned with what you might have also been called a directorate. There's the two slightly bigger changes in there are just moving what used to be called land management and advisory services from the integrated catchment management group of activities over to the resource use group of activities and renaming it primary sector engagement. And the other one is splitting out planning, reporting and funding into two new activities. So planning and reporting is the stuff that our team do, our team and the finance team. And then the funding is a slightly different, it has a different aspect. So we're just seeking to make that into two distinct activities. So that's probably, is it okay? It's okay if I leave it there and just open up for any questions and comments?
Councillor Hughes?
Look, I just, having been privy to the previous long-term plan, which Janine kindly shared with me, there's an awful lot of detail, and a lot of work that goes into this. And I'd just like to float a couple of suggestions to councillors. I would like to see us have a look at a reset, start from a zero base and build the business back up. And I suggest that probably needs to be given as a directive, if there's any support for that directive to staff at this point, because otherwise they'll be working on a long-term plan in the anticipation that they're going to be building on what we've already got. And I would like to see a full bottom-up review. That's the first point. And I support that by some discussions which I've had with some people in Robbie's catchment, where they want to take back responsibility for some of the activities that take place in their catchments. And that's going to have a significant impact on the structure. Now, I've been shared the people and budgets for the catchment. There's going to be some stranded costs if this happens. And I would have thought that needed to be factored into the long-term plans, if in fact it's possible to make changes and move responsibility from council, the management of these projects, back into the catchment. So I just wonder, I don't want to have this discussion in 12 months' time and find that we can't do it. I think it's important we have that discussion before then, so I'm just putting that on the table now and asking when is the right time for those points to be discussed by council.
Just, so this is just, so Councillor Hughes is just asking for some guidance on when we can make our wishes known in terms of how budgets are developed. Yeah.
Good point. First one, I guess the first one should have been asked.
Sorry,
the other way around.
sorry, just hang on a second because you don't have a light. So just speaking order, I've got Councillor Clarkson, Councillor Hodge, and Councillor Strange. Just if I can get you to keep the red light on down there at all times, that way you don't lose it. Oh, and Stu and there's somebody else that I missed. Anyways, go ahead. So, response?
Yeah, so there is a timeline built into that with discussion on things like the levels of service review and the financial strategy. And I think that's where we start covering off things about rating impacts and how much of a financial envelope we're working within. I don't know if Janine, you've got anything else to add to that? Sure.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, as Haven said, one of the key tenets of the long-term plan process is to review our levels of service. So what are the services that we provide and to what level? I guess the process that we use to do that is probably a little bit different to what Councillor Hughes is asking for consideration of, which is really starting from what is the level of service that we currently provide and where from there in response to your strategy, staff believe that there's an opportunity to do more, do less, do different, potentially transfer functions, whatever it may be, but it is anchored on the starting point of what we currently do. I think the significance of that is for many of those activities, we have been out and consulted with the community around those levels of service. So that just needs to be acknowledged. So the process sort of feeds that conversation, but it doesn't start from a blank piece of paper to rebuild the organisation. It's really going, where do we currently sit and where do those things need to change in response to particularly council strategy or other things in the external environment. That should, though, draw out those areas that you've also referenced, Councillor Hughes, around the do different is looking at, are there activities that communities actually want to take back, so that there is a different service delivery model, and for us to consider what that actually means from an organisational impact as well.
So if I understand correctly, when we set levels of service, we do that in consultation with the targeted ratepayers that receive that service, right?
Yeah.
And so if we are to change a level of service, we have to go back and consult again.
Correct.
So so the reason you start with the current level of service is because to change that, either improving or downgrading, will trigger a consultation process, assuming that it's significant, right?
Yeah.
It's material. So that's my understanding of that. So just want to make sure that we're clear on why we start with our current levels of service, because that's what has already been negotiated. And to start from zero assumes a different outcome to those negotiations, right? Am I right? Yeah. Okay.
And look, if I could just add, I think if we were to start from zero every 3 years, it'd be pretty hard to run an organisation because we've still got a lot of work to do in the meantime. I get I think I understand, and I just want to check I understand it right. I get the intent to be able to have a scrutiny over what we do and where we spend our money, as opposed were you requesting that maybe there needs to be a discussion in the process somewhere where there's a zero start about what we do and how we do it.
sorry, I'm gonna, so my speaking order after Chris, I've got Bruce, Katarina, Angela, Stu, Noel, and then Mike. So, did you want to further clarify for me, Chris, or?
I guess my concern is, I would like to understand what we're doing outside the work that we're mandated to do. Because it seems that we get involved in a whole lot of peripheral areas, and I'm not going to try and identify any of them. And we haven't had, I don't believe we've had the debate. We've got a strategic plan, sure, and it's an overarching plan, but it doesn't come down into the detail, which actually gives us some input into what's this really costing us? Is it necessary in this day and age, given that we're really under cost pressures? We know we've got a huge, massive inflation in the country. Everybody's hurting. What can we do as a council to pull that back and make it more palatable to our constituents? And from my perspective, the easiest way I've ever found that to be achieved is by starting from scratch and saying, why are we doing that? Can we stop doing that? Is there a better way of doing it? Is there a more efficient way of doing it? So that's the discussion that I'd like to have.
Great, thank you for that, Councillor Hughes. And what we were discussing before about levels of service, that is only a portion of what we do, right? That's sort of in that, I don't know, I'll go to you, Janine.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess when we talk our levels of service review, that does look across every activity that the council undertakes. Part of that will be looking at, for each of those levels of service, what is the legislative driver for it? Is it mandated? Is there some discretion in it? And what's the cost associated with providing that level of service? So I think the process that we run through is aimed to answer the questions that Councillor Hughes is rightly asking. I guess it comes from the perspective of we are an organisation with, as Chris has said, an existing program of work, and where are the change levers that we can, be working in developing what the future direction of the organisation and our expenditure and programs looks like, that we can't just turn off some of those taps immediately. Right. But I think we try and look at levels of service from all of those angles and bring that back through to you to go, which of the changes do you support staff doing further work on?
Okay, so when you're communicating us, you'll clearly spell out what is mandatory for us to deliver and what's discretionary. You'll also spell out what is a result of a consulted level of service, so that we're very clear where a change in something would trigger significant levels of engagement or something like that, right? So I think we're clear on what we're asking for in terms of how you step us as councillors through the process, and also the level of rigor we're asking for. All right, I'm going to go to Councillor Clarkson, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Hodge, after that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just interested in alignment of this list of group of activities with our other structures, if you like, our other approach. So I'm interested in the alignment with our committee structure, with our strategy document, and with our state of environment reporting. And so really my questions are around that looking at it from that high level view and thinking about alignment. So in terms of the topic group of activities under the heading Integrated Catchment Management, I'm trying to understand why catchment management and planning is placed there, and then below it directly as a separate grouping, flood protection and control works. I mean, it seems to me if we have a committee which is integrated catchment management, I'm just trying to understand how catchment management and planning flows across into that other category, basically. And another point relating to that I'd like to make is I can see in the group of activities relating to science, policy and information, a commentary around environmental monitoring, environmental science and information. I'm wondering where Mātauranga fits in that. And because, you know, if you're going to talk environmental science, then the question is, what do you mean by environmental science? So I'd like some comment on those two matters. Thank you.
I guess in terms of the distinction between the different groups of activity, integrated catchment management, flood protection and control works, flood protection is determined as significant, so it has to be separated from the other and it needs to be kept distinct from the other areas. Notwithstanding, there is obviously a crossover between many of these areas, but I guess that's one comment on there. I'm not really, sure.
Yeah, so Mātauranga is definitely built in terms of that environmental monitoring program. I think probably if we go back 9 years, there was a specific business case in terms of how we incorporate that into our science program. So that will be in the detail underneath each of these.
Yeah, well, I accept the second point, but I need to make further comment on my first observation. So, catchment management and planning is if it's truly going to work and be integrated, it needs to be in both those sections. Is the point I'm making. How do you ensure that the flood protection, river management, land drainage and control works are truly integrated with a catchment management approach? Just taking your list on face value, I know that, you know, there are dangers in taking it on face value, but I'm just trying to get a sense of how it really does fit together, and I guess the mutual interactions that occur between different groups of activities and stuff like that.
Yeah, look, and I'll just invite Greg to probably...
Sorry, can I just clarify in terms of the report? So this is a reporting structure, as Haven said. The mandatory element of it is the Local Government Act identifies particular activities that councils are required to report on separately with some mandatory measures, so that there's some benchmarking and consistency that can be undertaken across the sector, which is why we have to call that out. Operationally, it is an integrated catchment management approach that Greg can perhaps speak to.
Sorry, Katarina, can I get you to turn your mic off just so I can bring Greg in?
Yeah, just in response, I think Janine actually took that well. So operationally, we do run an integrated catchment management program across both of those groups of activities. That is the fundamental for the integrated catchment management directorate. So the integrated catchment management group of activities is not the same as the work that is undertaken by the integrated catchment management directorate.
Yeah, so I think I've had my answer. Classification doesn't determine structure and alignment, but it's still important because it's like a lens that you're passing over the issue, and then the question is, are you really doing what you're intending to do?
Yes, and of course to monitor that we have a committee structure which does overview it.
The other thing I point out is that we have zone plans across the region, and they are integrated across all of those activities.
Councillor Hodge? Mike.
Sorry. So my question was about the summary number 3, but I was just going through the powers of the TOR for Strat and Pole, and once upon a time I would have believed that this probably would be right, that with regular project updates to provide through Strat and Pole, but Strategy and Pole is no longer the whole council like it used to be. So I wondered whether or not that's relevant in itself, even though the terms of reference of Strategy and Pole says we're just about more of a law than this damn council is. So I'm questioning that. What I'm questioning is project updates to be provided through Strategy and Policy, when it should always come to us now that Strategy and Policy is not a full council.
So if I understand correctly, these are just updates, it's not decisions, right? So it would be like when we have project updates that come through risk and assurance, that it's just, this is how we're progressing, and so there's a subset of council that ensures we are indeed progressing, it's not giving direction to the LTP.
That's correct. All of the decisions or direction giving in terms of where the LTP is heading will be achieved through council workshops and council meetings. So there would be no decision making by the Strategy and Policy Committee. It really is providing an elected member project governance layer in essence. So you can understand where we're at with the program of work and what's coming up next in terms of those activities, but not making the key decisions. That will come back to this whole table.
Angela.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report. I think most of my questions were similar to Councillor Hodges. Yeah, just whether that was the right committee for it to go through. I just had a further question. Paragraph 21 is a bit ambiguous. You say, however, 2 key changes are recommended, but I can see no 2 key changes. Is that just a typo or?
Yeah, maybe it's not clearly outlined. If you refer back to the table on paragraph 19, I can just step you out what those changes are. It's the movement of land management advisory services from the integrated catchment management group of activity into the resource use group of activity and renaming it primary industry engagement. And the other key change that's referring to is the splitting out of planning, funding, planning, reporting and funding, which is in the customer, community and services group of activity, into those 2 new names highlighted blue, planning and reporting and community support. So that's what that last paragraph is referring to.
Cool, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, if it had said are recommended as noted in paragraph 18, that would just help us circle back to the right place. That would be great. All right, now I've got Councillor Kneebone.
Thanks. Just in response to Chris's suggestion, look, I'm not supportive of, I forget the terminology used, but going back to base 1 to decide what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. As Chris said, I think, this is an enormous organisation. I guess, Chris, with respect, it concerns me that from your commentary, you appear to have spent a little bit of time with Robbie and some of the ICM stuff and decided that that's quite sacred and quite justified, yet you seem to think there's a whole bunch of other stuff we do that can be done away with, and I think you're going down a really dangerous road. I think you're underestimating how much time and resource would be required to do that. If I've understood your proposal properly, and I acknowledge I may not have, and I think we've got a whole bunch of work programs that interact with the work programs of a whole bunch of our stakeholders as well. And I'm just thinking of some of the LTP consultations we used to do of old, an annual plan when we used to produce much bigger documents before we were allowed to make them a bit more concise. And it wasn't uncommon to sit here for a week in bloody LTP hearings, and we used to go to Thames and sit there for 2 days because there were so many claims that come into Thames. And if I've understood what you're proposing, I can see us sitting around this table for a blimmin' month consulting with the community, because believe you me, they'll come back and point out all the things with that, all the ramifications of what we're proposing to cut. And I guess the other point I would make is that, what's legislated, what do we have to do versus what's feel-good stuff. And I'd use the analogy, I was trying to think of one, and maybe it's not a very good one, of what constitutes a family that brings up their child really well versus one that doesn't. The world's your oyster in terms of how many blimmin' sports events you want your kid to go to versus it. And just because you don't take your kid to 10 different sports events in a month doesn't mean you're not looking after them properly, And there is a whole bunch of, hey, should we be doing this? Should we be not? But to try and make that decision in the next 12 months and go back to square one, I think it's just it's bigger than Ben Hur, and I don't think we'd get very far. Sure, if we want to identify some key areas that you're concerned about that we can focus on for the next, there's an LTP that I've forgotten, or an annual plan, then hey, by all means, let's do it and have a discussion about what it should be. But to go back to square one with the whole business, I just think it's not realistic.
Councillor Smith?
Thank you. Possibly suffering Stu's wrath for the second time this morning. I want to pick up on what Chris introduced earlier, and I've got some comments written in here. One, legislative direction equals certain costs. Two, level of service, targeted ratepayers. I think for me, and I really want to understand the timeframes here within this document. Earlier this week, Greg produced a document in the ICM workshop, which was our people and budgets. It showed there that there's 160 staff within the ICM area or the directorate, of which for flood protection and land drainage, there's 3.6 people leaders there's one people leader to 3.6 staff. In catchment and river management, there's one leader to 3.3 staff. In biosecurity and biodiversity, there's one leader to 5 staff. In resilient development and emergency management, there's one people leader to 4 staff. Exceptionally high ratios, and therefore, as a former chair of a drainage committee and member of river committees, the issue for us 3.5 years ago was the costs within this organisation as to the administration of those districts compared to delivery. And when you look at the budgets, I don't want to dwell on them because it's getting down into detail, but these are the sort of things that I really do have an interest in. And my question is, we've had approaches for going back to self-managing districts. I want to know that the time frame within this document to do that external consultation on level of service is sufficient to do the workload properly, because as I think Chris did mention, or somebody has, that we get to a certain point in time, and I'm used to that after the last 15 years, we can't go and relook at that because we have run out of time. You know, for me, the time starts now, but are we going to allow sufficient time to speak to our targeted ratepayers? Because I'm discounting the legislative compliance that we have to do as an organisation. That's a done deal. But where there's discretionary income and taxing of our ratepayers, we need time to understand and consult with meaningful consultation, just like we did with the Muggridges. We went out and talked and we listened and we heard. If we don't do that, we will carry on doing the same old stuff. And I can't explain this cost structure. Very superficial look at it right now in integrated catchment. And Greg's probably cringing over there. I'm sorry to pick on this, Greg, but it's just one of those things from within that area of flood protection and land drainage that has come up previously, and it's still an unanswered question. How can this organisation justify the costs? And we need to have that meaningful discussion. So I'd like to know when we're actually going to be doing the consultation with those targeted landowners. Thank you.
So I think it's really good to raise these things today, because we're giving a really good steer to the ELT and the chief executive as to the areas that we want to drill down into with significant level of detail, and your request for assurance that we allow for sufficient time to engage with these communities is noted. All right. So I've got Councillor Downard, Councillor Cookson, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Hughes. All right. So Councillor Downard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just agree with Councillor Hugh. I think, you know, as a new time councillor, and especially just going through the annual plan, what I thought was, you know, coming through the long-term plan, the 1.6 and the baseline, then ended up without all the niceties that we all want to do, was 5.2, and we ended up with 6.8. So is the baseline, you know, from the long-term plan business as usual, the 1.6 going to the 5.2. So I look forward to a workshop that we all are on a even playing ground, that we do know the process on where we're starting and where we're going.
Yep. And just to clarify, it was 5.8 is where we landed. All right, Councillor Cookson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to say that I agree with Chris. I agree with Chris Hughes, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Dharma, and Noel, Councillor Smith, on all those discussions. I was actually elected on exactly that we were going to go back and look at the burden rate of where it lays and if it's fair or not. And that was how I got elected here. So in this, in the next 12 months, we need to dive deep into that place and see if the costs that we are being charged are appropriate for the level of service we're getting. And I call that burden rate, or that's what I've been told in the past, it's a burden rate cost. So I look forward to those discussions. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes?
Just following on from Councillor Smith's comments, my scrutiny is not just limited to catchment. I would also like to look at other sectors of the business. One being transport, it's our single biggest cost centre. I know I've had a meeting with Mark, which was very good, and he's explained the dynamics of what's going on. But I'm interested in the costs and efficiencies. We've got an outsourced operation. How many people does it take to run that? Now, we don't have anything to do with the ownership of the vehicles, running of those. So there's a lot of things that I'd like to spend some time on and understand what the costs are and what we're delivering for it. I see buses running everywhere with nobody on them. That's costing our ratepayers, so I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Can I just reassure Councillor Hughes that I'm not a single issue? That was just one that I had an example of.
Yeah, great. And I think that I am sure that what staff are picking up on is that this council is very focused on effectiveness and efficiency and ensuring that there is adequate return for where we put our resources, because they are not our resources, they are ratepayers' resources. So I'm sure you are all getting the message loud and clear that we want that level of detail, that we recognize that there are new councillors around this table that will be going through the LTB process for the first time. It is a complex, long, drawn out process. It is, and we want to make sure that we're taking everybody through that in a way that allows them to feel confident in their understanding, so that they are confident in their decision making. All right. Oh, yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I think, yes, we hear it loud and clear. In terms of sufficient time to go into detail and sufficient time for consultation, it's probably just to remind ourselves, basically by the end of this year, we'll have to have a pretty firm idea what it is that we're going to be wanting to go out and consult on. It's going to come around really fast. And at the same time that the rest of our business goes, we're not stopping the rest of our business just so we can do this. And so Janine, or Haven, sorry, you just might like to give that reassurance to council. What is that opportunity so they have sufficient time to go into detail and be confident in what they're going to go out and consult with early next year?
So yeah, we do have a series of deliverables mapped out in there, and throughout those there will be quite a lot of workshops to get your direction on those as we go through the process. And then, as Chris said, we do need to nail down what the big issues and matters are that we put into the formal consultation that does start next year. So I guess just at a high level, you'll see regular updates and workshops over the coming months up until the end of the year when we get the draft budget pulled together. It's a big detailed project to sort of list out every one would take some time, but it starts with the levels of service workshops, flows into the revenue and financial policy, the financial strategy, and then we pull together that draft budget at the end of the year.
Right, we've got that work stream outlined in paragraph 16. So brace yourselves in June, is what I'm saying. And while we've got that foundation, that draft non-financial forecasting assumptions workshop being a strategy and policy committee, it is a workshop, so I'm going to, all council are welcome to attend and participate in that, well, at the discretion of the chair of that, but, I encourage you, given the questions that we've got coming out today in this discussion, let's make sure we're all participating in that. All right, so I've got Jennifer, and then I've got, I'm gonna go to Stu Kneebone after that, because you've had a couple cracks there, Stu, or Noel, so I'm gonna go to, sorry? Yeah, I'm gonna go to Jen, and then I'm going to you, and then I'm going to Noel.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond as well since we were asked for opinion. I recall coming in new and having the exact same desire as where I think Councillor Hughes has expressed. It was for different reasons. It was more for how do we transform to deliver good service socially and environmentally, rather than the more, what I'm hearing, the more austerity type reason. But I want to give some confidence, including to Councillor Cookson, over those many workshops. You do get a chance to really go into where all of the rates kind of fall, and whether that be how the charges and fees are done, all that stuff, and so there's that opportunity to ask those things, and that's probably why people say it takes that first term to really learn the whole thing, and then it's a lot easier to be even more effective in, say, subsequent terms, because it does require that. And on the idea of a reset, having come from last Trinam and having seen our new CEO come in and having seen the restructure that happened then, and now seeing the reform storm, as I still call it, and how busy our staff are, I don't think now would be the time for that kind of review. But I think that with the future for local government and the Through Waters changes and other things that are happening, there will naturally be an evolving and a really deep scrutiny into what each council does. And so I think that would be the right time to ask even more of those questions, in case that's helpful. But yeah, no, I appreciate the desire.
Great. All right, Councillor Kneebone.
Oh, thanks. Look, my question is one of clarification, and it's not about giving you my wrath or whatever you want to call it now, but you've been in this game for a long time. You appreciate how much work's involved if we're to go down the path that I think Chris is suggesting. I'm curious as to how you see that panning out, because I just don't think we've physically got the time or the resource in this organisation to do this sort of back to basics, start from bloody scratch that Chris is suggesting. I just can't see how it's going to happen, and so therefore, what's the process going to be to try and decide where we're going to target our efforts? I mean, I heard Chris talk about public transport. Well, there's a whole bunch of stakeholders intertwined in our public transport programs. Where the hell are we going to start? Because I can tell you right now that I just can't see how it's going to happen. Unless I've misunderstood what Chris is saying, and what you're saying.
And what we, so just bringing it back to the clarification we had earlier, that as we go through this process, staff are going to make it very clear, this bit is mandated by regulation, this bit is not. This bit has been consulted in terms of levels of service and involved external parties. This bit has not. And give us some real clear guidance as we step through, so we can see the areas where we can go into greater depth without necessarily triggering a huge amount of public consultation, et cetera, right? So I'm just, that's what we've all agreed, right? Yep. Happy? Okay, I'm gonna go to you, Noel.
Thank you, and yes, I'm on board with that, Madam Chair. Stu, you might have misinterpreted, and that's fine. I don't necessarily support the whole, throw out the baby and the bathwater together, but there are some aspects of the long-term plan and levels of service that we certainly need to address. My concern is, and calling on that experience of my previous life, the reality is, if council internalises this without the quality consultation that's needed, and I'll pick on integrated catchment again, going out, if we did it internally and from reports from staff and our own ideas, and then go out for consultation and seek feedback, you generally run out of options and time to do anything meaningful other than do the same old, same old. My experience has shown that by going out early and engaging in asking people directly what their aspirations are, rather than sending out a consultation document, actually meeting with people, and I think we saw the benefit of that with Mugridges. You actually front up, invite them, they turn up, and you get that meaningful feedback, which you can then integrate into the discussions and formulating that consultation document. It too often is councils develop it, send it out, and wait for the masses to come, and it's too late.
And we've sent the very clear message about ensuring that we have appropriate levels of time or time frame built into this so that we can do just that.
So Madam Chair, I think in terms of the process, that opportunity will crystallise end of June, just before you head into your council recess. That is when we'll come back to you with the levels of service process and the areas for potential change. Now that will be the opportunity for council to go, yep, support or don't, and then what is the engagement
that
we
triggers.
Can actually do, working alongside progressing those options and opportunities.
Great.
So I, for one, would like to be involved in those workshops or public consultation events, as I think a lot of us would be.
Yeah, and we'll
But
work
that'll
through
be
that.
when you're back from.
We'll work through that. All right, I do want to wrap this up because we are just receiving this report. Councillor Marr.
That's where I was heading to actually. Thank you, Chair. Certainly encourage, as Chair of Stratton Poll, to everyone be involved, and that's a no-brainer. And in the interest of progressing it, I'd like to move that this report be accepted.
Great. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Downard. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. Thank you very much, Haven. Really appreciate the presentation. All right, we now move on to 8.6, item 8.6. This is on page, am I right? Sorry, what am I at? 258. Page 258. So we've got Director Ryan with us again. So this is, and just so we're all clear, we are just receiving this report. Just so we focus in on our process here. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, quite a timely report, particularly having just discussed Mugridges and the kind of complex challenges that we are dealing with in the flood protection and land drainage space. Those challenges are only increasing in terms of the changing environment that we need to deal with, in terms of looking at sustainable land use practice, because infrastructure is a long-term investment by council and effectively by our ratepayers. So it's important that we're making some good decisions now in terms of moving forward. One particular area, I guess, of absence that has been identified over the past years is, and this is by council as well, is the participation of government in supporting our communities to be resilient and support our flood protection infrastructure. With the costs rising, it is becoming an increased burden on our ratepayers, and there's a high awareness of this right across the sector. What this paper does is introduce to you to Iru Kahika, and in particular the River Managers Special Interest Group, which is my counterparts across the country, and the work that we are doing to bring the government to the table in terms of acknowledging the national benefits of our flood protection infrastructure and the need or case for government co-investment. The work that this, I guess, focus has supported initially was our Shovel Ready program. When Shovel Ready came about, the sector was in a perfect position to jump in through that open door, put some projects forward, and secure a significant amount of funding for the region to offset the costs to ratepayers. We now have a second opportunity that we have identified as part of a move to promote longer term and sustained investment by government in this particular area of work that we do. In lieu of sustaining that sustained investment, we've put forward a second tranche of funding, which, as you can appreciate, over the last couple of months, has probably come to the top of the table for a lot of folk around the government table. So the purpose of this report is to raise your awareness of this work that we are doing. It is about supporting our existing work program and projects that are already identified through our long-term plan process. It is about making sure that additional funding is there to help offset those increasing costs that our community is facing. You'll also note that we have picked up a lot of learnings from our previous shovel-ready program in terms of it does take a lot of effort to receive, expend and report on government funding. And so we've made sure that we've been quite conservative around the costs involved in these projects going forward, not only with regard to program and project management, but also acknowledging the impact of inflation and the fact that this is a 3-year program. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to leave it there, as it is just for information and awareness, and I'll be sure to give Council an update as things progress.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, so through the Chair, Greg, thanks for your report, and this, I think, is relevant to our field trip yesterday, so I'm going to make a couple of connections to the field trip. I'm interested in knowing whether the funding, the co-funding that's being applied for, because it does highlight climate resilience, the extent to which nature-based solutions to climate resilience can be built into the proposal for funding. So, for example, yesterday we saw Pipiroa and the estuarine scenario with the birds and all the rest. And I'm wondering to what extent in these proposals, you know, I've noticed the fish passage pumps in the last 2 items of the appendix, but to what extent has the lens of nature-based solution been passed over all the proposals so that it's not just focused on infrastructure and engineering, that at every opportunity we build in some nature-based solution to improve climate resilience? So, you know, reading the list there, it's hard to tell with most of the titles there whether in fact that lens has been applied as well, or whether they are just entirely infrastructure and engineering projects. And I guess at the same time also understanding that on our field trip when we stood by the pump station at Orchard Road, the thing that struck me significantly about that was, yes, it will help protect the tuna, but the pump station was a focal point for major biosecurity issues. It was surrounded on all sides by grey willow, woolly nightshade, pampas, gorse, all sorts of stuff. And so the question is, again, you know, when that infrastructure is put in place, what are we doing about the other issues that it promotes? Because, you know, any form of disturbance on a landscape causes the style of disturbance which actually enhances further issues relating to biosecurity. So I'm just interested in your analysis of that appendix in terms of that lens of nature-based solution, and whether in fact that's been built into a greater number of projects than I can detect by just reading the titles.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Clarkson. Yeah, it does vary across those projects, and you will note that some of them are very sort of engineering scheme focused in terms of some more straightforward upgrades. But a couple of projects I would highlight for you are the first 2, which are around supporting our catchment and river program in our catchments that benefit from our schemes. And so those are about looking beyond infrastructure and actually working towards much more healthy catchment that flow down into those streams. So and that's across both the Waikato Waipa West Coast areas and the Coromandel River catchments. The other ones I'll point out there is some of our work that we do on the Hauraki Plains to entrap sediment that comes through the river through natural processes, and then collect that sediment on a regular basis to utilise that for our infrastructural work, having some cost benefit to council, but also helping to remove sediment from that particular system. I think it was in the order of 14 kilometres worth of silt traps that we have on the Hauraki Plains, and so certainly looking beyond a simple engineering solution and how we can work with the environment that's occurring there. And look, I mean, I think, and making a general comment, is the whole focus of our directorate is about integrated catchment management and looking at opportunities when we do our infrastructure projects to achieve as many benefits as we can for the community. And I think that's the challenge for each of those projects as they progress through their different stages, to make sure that we are looking at those opportunities.
Yeah, look, that's really helpful. Just a quick follow-up. So when you make the application for the funding, does the prescription for that funder recognise the importance of nature-based solutions, or are you constrained in any way by the nature of the funder you're making the proposal to?
No, and what I may look to do, so we have a large business case document that underpins this work that's been prepared, and that does talk more broadly about the fact that engineering has certainly moved on in the past decades. It's not just about building concrete things and controlling the environment that we work in, but it's more about working with that environment.
Thank you.
Right. Councillor Cookson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a Piaka ratepayer, the only thing I welcome this these projects, and if the government will fund them, that's great. The only thing is, I think there's not enough Piaka River scheme in here, because as I said, we're the poor cousin and we always get treated that way. And it's no disrespect to Greg, I've already spoken about this, but some of our renewal of our assets haven't fitted in this zone. So it's unfortunate that we couldn't have done more upgrading on the Piaka River. And just feels like that we're once again been subsidising the rest of the catchment, and we're left. But I'm not saying that's true, but that's the feeling that I feel. So yeah, and I hope that in the next round, the Piaka River gets a lot more funding towards replacing some fresh-friendly pumps and some floodgates that may need to be replaced in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Oh, yeah, just to say that one of the things that came up with the Muggeridge's talk with the community is that they were interested in us finding out about how central government went wide their decision making, but it would be useful to let publicity know that we are actually applying for more government funding, that it's not just a one-off, and the processes might be better, but there's hopefully, I think you're like 43 million coming in here. There's quite a number of projects would be worth mentioning as part of that Muggeridge's report.
And through Madam Chair, we have put out a media statement when this opportunity came about earlier, and we'll be sure to follow that up. One thing that we are doing nationally as river managers is also making sure that there is that heightened awareness across the sector, given what we've seen over the last few months around the work that we're doing and the importance of the work that river managers do.
And here's hoping that we can put out another really great media statement once this comes to fruition. But just as an FYI to the councillors, Wendy, it might be good to circulate that previous media release just to councillors so you can see what messaging has gone out in regards to this project. And like I say, fingers crossed that there's bigger fanfare to come on it. I've got Warren next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greg, with the recent weather events, is there any ability to go back to government now and look at boosting up some of these figures, etc.? I know, talking to Emily up in Whitianga, she's sort of, we kicked the figure around of about 6 million. There's sort of 3 million here in the book at the moment. But yeah, just wonder where that sits, and it's something. I know the government's looking at a lot of hard infrastructure at the moment with what's been damaged, etc. But just some of the soft infrastructure and looking at these flooding and river catchments, etc. And pushing that angle.
Yeah, and thank you for your comment, Councillor. It's very relevant to the time that we're in at the moment. So I'll make a couple of observations. One is that I guess these are always put up, but they are subject to further confirmation once we get into the process of receiving the funding. In terms of working up specific funding agreements, so there will be the opportunity for us to consider prioritisation of work, particularly in those top 2 catchment areas, because there will have been needs that would have changed since this initial, I guess, proposal was worked up. And you rightly point out that yes, there has been a very strong focus on hard infrastructure recovery, and that's certainly the, I guess, the flavour that we're seeing come through where there's government support being made available, but we are being as active as we can in terms of highlighting that it is not just about the hard infrastructure, and particularly when it comes to our flood schemes, it is also about the damage that has been sustained to our catchments and the opportunity to remediate that in order to support a healthier and more sustainable catchment.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to support both Warren and, Councillor Mayor and Councillor Clarkson. That I think we do need to look at soft infrastructure a lot more. And as Emily pointed out, she could quite easily do with another $3 million up there in soft infrastructure in the Coromandel. And I imagine the Waipa and southern districts of the Waipa River would most probably be wanting the same. So soft infrastructure is most probably in the future something we're going to seriously look at. Thank you.
Great, all right. So do I have a mover to receive the report? Councillor Nicol, second, and Councillor Kneebone. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much for that, Greg. Look forward to good news
Thank you, Madam Chair.
soon. All right. We've now got item 8.7. This is on page 263 of your agenda. This is the CoLab draft statement of intent for the year ended 30 June 2024 and the RSHL draft 2024 statement of intent. That's exciting. Are we all excited about this? We're all excited. Okay. Janine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as the report sets out, Council is a shareholder in two council-controlled organisations, so CoLab, or Waikato Local Authority Shared Services, and Regional Software Holdings Limited as well. Each year, each of those CCOs is required to issue a statement of intent, and that provides a way of communication regarding priorities and measures that the CCO will work towards in the coming year. The SOI is required to be adopted by the CCO by the 1st of May each year, but prior to that, Council has the opportunity to provide feedback on the draft SOI. Normally, these documents would come through the Finance and Services Committee for consideration. However, due to the timing of the receipt of them, they're coming directly to you. So just an opportunity for feedback from councillors around the objectives that have been set that we can report back to the CCOs respectively.
Through you, Mr. Chair, question to Janine. Janine, it's probably a very simple explanation. Consultants, most of your expenses are consulting. Can you just explain what that is? It's a dirty word at the moment, of course.
Sorry, Councillor Hughes, and which?
Oh, in your financial management reports. I assume we're going there, are we, or not? 303, yeah, 30, oh, further on to 298.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I think this reflects the current structure and resourcing model for the CCO at the moment. Councillors may be familiar with the discussion around the transition of RSHL from the entity that set up regulatory software for the regional sector into a broader regional shared services sector entity. That work will happen over the next 12 months, in essence, which will, from my perspective as a brand new board member on that CCO, call into question the whole resourcing model, delivery model, which at the moment is coalitions of the willing in terms of council staff, supplemented by, as you point out, those external costs. So does the CCO itself actually need to resource up and be employing more people, or what is the right delivery model given its broader objectives?
Sorry, through you again, Mr. Chair. So are you saying that is a genuine overhead? There's no element of IP investment or capital investment or intellectual property included in those numbers? Is that it's a pure operating expense?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nicol. Thanks. Okay, so we're commenting on, so you're saying that these are the draft ones to give feedback on, but the final ones will come back to us? Is that what you were saying before, Janine?
This is the opportunity for council to have input into these draft SOIs.
Okay.
So this is the chance. You won't get, there's no further opportunity after this.
So it's just the opportunity of input. There's no further sign off required from us to accept that statement of intent. Good to understand. Thanks. I think for just some thoughts I had, and I'm mindful that, you know, that's on face value of just this report, not a huge amount of involvement with either to date myself. I think it could be considered around how many independent directors there are for each. I just noted there was one independent chair, was it for RSHL, and I just thought getting those fresh eyes from outside local government can be really helpful. So it's just my feedback as something to consider.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just respond to that, through the RSHL board composition has been recently reviewed as it has set up into a broader shared services entity, and that has expanded that independent membership from previously 1 to 2.
Oh, awesome! That's what I was kind of after. I didn't. And then the other part was, I noticed that in the appendix 4, and noting the recent change with Western Bay of Plenty District Council, it's currently listed as one of the Waikato local authorities. It's like Taupo was just taken out and Western Bay of Plenty put in, but they might want to just tidy that up to say that it is from outside this region. And I think for both, I would, since it's our chance to feedback, I think the focus on assisting the councils with their climate change work would be really helpful, since to me that seems to be something that would be timing-wise of preference based on everyone learning together still at the moment on how to tackle complex issues like that, and including biodiversity, for example, because it's linked. Because I note there was something around a customer digital enablement program with CoLab, which was focusing on a broader topic of sustainability, but rubbish and recycling. I thought, well, that's something that I would put behind those other two topics of something to really help our councils get on top of engaging with the community with digitally. And those really my main ones. I am interested in what CoLab's talking about with participatory democracy and how they might help the councils with that. Do you want to comment on that at all? But yeah, I just couldn't quite get quite enough out of that statement of intent to understand that fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Nicol, just if I could comment on perhaps those matters, because I'm on the CoLab board, and there's actually a board meeting tomorrow, so it's quite timely. Any comments that get made? The Democracy Centre of Expertise, so I think that chief executives around the region and the councils recognise that some of them are quite poorly resourced, and with some of the signals through the Future for Local Government panels, you know, thinking a lot of the ideas that have been raised for increasing community participation, it was recognised that it would be useful to get a centralised skill set for how to go about this. With respect to the climate change comments, I don't think we've tasked CoLab, which are quite thin on the ground with their own people, to take a centralised approach. But what has happened through the Mural Forum, the Mural Forum is setting what its priorities are for the region. You know, if the Mural Forum sets that as priority, then that would get pushed down the chief executives, go find a way of getting some commonality or whatever it is that, you know, where that goes. And now whether CoLab would be the vehicle to be tasked with that or some other avenue,
Yeah, that's good to be aware of, thanks, because I notice in the climate space that can very much happen, and the smaller councils will be left behind on this topic we're trying to tackle together. And CoLab, I see as one avenue to help with that.
Yes, and
considering their history with the energy and management work that they've been doing.
And the efficiency savings for councils that have been, And so I think that CoLab will respond to what councils ask them to do, as opposed to generate their own work program and go out to councils. And just with respect to the customer digital enablement, there's probably a bigger fish to fry there. I think the district council said we don't want to do everything all at once. We want to start with something small that we'll have something in common with. Hence they started rubbish and recycling. Of course, from our perspective, there's a much bigger fish to fry. And so we're not part actively of that project unless it expands into a different space.
I understand. Thank you for that.
All right, Councillor Marr.
Yeah, Janine, in regard to RSHL, and excuse my ignorance, but is there a relationship between IRIS and Reboot?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, there isn't. So IRIS is a collaborative project across the regional sector, which is done through RSHL, whereas Reboot is our own.
In-house?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, no more questions. Do I have a motion to, sorry, I'm looking for my.
Happy to move.
Councillor
Mahuta.
Thank you.
Sorry, happy to move.
Thank you for that, Tippa. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Downard. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. All right, we're now moving on to 8.8. This is on page 309. We have different.
No, got the second.
Right. I was like, we have different people. Welcome, Lizette and Ed.
Good afternoon.
We're talking about the council representation for governance for the Thames Coromandel District Council Shoreline Management Pathway implementation. This has been a change of spirit and heart, so good to see.
Exactly, thank you. So I'm here on behalf of Alejandro Cifuentes today. He's unwell, and Ed's acting for Tracy, so that's why there's a surprising couple of faces here at the end of the table. But the paper's pretty straightforward. It requests that council appoints 2 representatives on that implementation phase of the coastal adaptation project that Thames Coromandel District Council has been doing, which is called the Shoreline Management Pathways. They've adopted that shoreline management pathways in September last year, so now they're really looking for the next phase and really implementing what they have put together, and that is that framework for managing and reducing risks to people, property and the environment in taonga associated with coastal hazards. The details all in the report. Alejandro will assist appointees in getting up to speed in the agenda contents of any meetings, and that's what we're here for. So without further ado, it's over to discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you. Awesome to have that invite from TCDC for 2 councillors to attend. It's important work and take quite a bit of interest in it. I'd like to nominate the 2 constituency councillors for those roles, which would be Councillor Marr and Councillor Hodge.
So
and if they accept.
We've got a mover and a seconder. Are the 2 constituent councillors happy to accept those appointments?
I'm happy to accept, and it's great to see that relationship improving. And thank you, Councillor Nicol and Councillor Kneebone.
All right, we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Carried.
Kia ora.
Fantastic. All right, next we have 8.9. This is on page 313. This is the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee appointment. So this is, we've got Mark here. So this is formalizing the Future Proof Committee adopted the terms of reference, went through a bit of a process to get agreement across all of the members, but we did, we had support. So this is just going through the motion of putting the right people on or putting people onto those, onto that subcommittee. Mark, did you want to say anything, or are we?
Perhaps the only thing I'll say is through you, Madam Chair, I think this is a really great initiative by the council. What it is it's gifting a small amount of the control that this council has over public transport services in the region as the region's public transport authority. There can only be one, and that's us. But it's gifting a little bit of that into a collective enterprise that we will rely on to ensure that we have far greater coordination between services and infrastructure, which is absolutely what this council has already acknowledged is required for public transport to be successful. So I think this is a great initiative led by this council and a great outcome, and it's excellent to see our future-proof partners equally support it.
Right. We do, we've got Angela and myself we previously discussed that as a council. We do have the option for an alternate. Councillor Nicol has expressed an interest in that alternate position. Are we all good with that? Angela, did you want to speak as the deputy chair of this?
No, I was just going to suggest Councillor Nicol as well. But.
Do you want to move that? I'm happy to
I'm happy to
second
move
that.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Sorry, I had a question to understand. So we've got future-proof, understand all that. So we've got this public transport committee, which we subcommittee, which I think we all endorsed. So you're there, and I think Angela's already
Angela's the deputy.
Is the deputy. And can I just ask why Angela wouldn't be? Because I know she's got a passion for public transport, why she wouldn't be, so, on that
Why she
committee.
wouldn't be.
So how does it actually work in practice? So, yes, but you've got two members on the.
I'm not chairing this. It has an independent chair.
Yeah, so we've got two members on this committee or one member on the committee?
Two members.
And so this alternate would be for either of you?
Yes.
Okay, now it's not confusing.
Okay. Good stuff. All right. So we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favor?
Okay.
Opposed? Carried. All right. Yeah.
You're actually mentioned in the motion, so should you actually?
Would somebody else like to
I'm
second
happy
this? Well, no, you can't do it, Jennifer, because you would be mentioned in it as well. Councillor Clarkson, all right. All right. Do I need to put it again if we change the seconder? Yeah. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
The previous, it just occurred to me that with the previous item, with the Thames Coromandel shoreline management plan stuff, we don't have an alternate for that. If the council was happy to, I'd be really keen to be the alternate if either Warren or Kata can't go to do those governance duties. Just
That would have to go back to that.
I don't know what the tours are for that, and whether or not we're allowed to have an alternate, but I'm sure that it can be raised.
Thanks. I'm just mindful that it can happen.
All right. So now we need to move into public excluded. We've got a mover in Councillor Hodge, second in Councillor Hughes. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Yeah, once All right, thank you very much, councillors, for your participation and your preparation for this meeting. I think we made good progress. What looked like a bit of a doorstop, we got through in a good, timely manner and spent most of our time on the areas that needed the level of debate. So well done, everybody. So we will have a karakia.
You're welcome to join in if you wish. Onahia, mai te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia māmā, te nākau, te tinana, te hininaro, e te ara takatu, koia e rongo, e whakarerea, aki ke ronga, kia tina, homiai, huiei, tai kie.
Thank you very much, councillors. Meeting closed.